The Paul Leslie Interviews.
So you're in New York.
Yep, my whole life.
What part of New York are you in right now?
I've been living in Brooklyn for about 42 years.
42 years.
Moved from the city, 57th Street, to Brooklyn, and very happy I did.
The man we're talking with is Allan Schwartzberg. He's a musician, a drummer, a record producer. It's a great pleasure to welcome you here.
It's my pleasure, Paul. Thank you. Thanks for asking.
So, it's a New York story. Are your parents from New York?
Yeah. Born and raised in the Bronx, early years in the Bronx. Moved to Queens, and I moved to the city. Moved out of my parents' house, moved into Manhattan, where just before moving, my mother told me, if anybody offers you a cigarette, don't take it. I don't know how that popped into my head, but it did. Then my wife and I moved to Brooklyn when the children were coming. We thought we'd raise them in a little nicer environment rather than concrete and smog. So we've been in Brooklyn for over 42 years.
Tell us about the music that you most identified with when you were growing up.
It was jazz, and it was mainly drumming. I was walking to school one day, in the days when you could actually have an 8 or 9-year-old walk by himself to school without worrying, and I heard a drummer playing, kind of like Cozy Cold Gene Krupa style, that kind of stuff, and I froze. I remember freezing it in my tracks and saying, "What the hell is that?" And I just went home and tried to do it, duplicate it on the washing machine and dryer, banging on different sides of the appliance to get different sounds, and pots and pans and wooden spoons, and that was my introduction. That was my introduction to music. My parents loved music. They weren't musicians, but they were great dancers and jitterbuggers. I got a love for music from them, and then I just fell in love with jazz mainly. That's what I wanted to be, a jazz musician, and I set my sights on that. Then realized that I enjoyed living indoors, so I better find something else to do. So I developed a love for R&B and blues and rock and roll, and got into doing recording work, mainly recording work, after playing live for many years, and then very much enjoyed doing that. And I was lucky enough to be in the heyday of recording. We had a lot of my friends and I had a lot of great years as studio musicians, doing all kinds of projects.
Was it hard to break into that studio work?
It is very hard. I just followed my instincts. I got called to do some sessions because people were liking my jazz playing. Because a jazz musician is kind of like the height of kind of virtuosity. If you could play jazz, then you could you would think you could pretty much play anything. It turns out not to be true, but anyway, what I would do is on every recording session, I would go into the control room and listen back. And musicians, some of the older studio guys weren't doing that. They didn't care. They would look at their watch and think about the next session, and they would just say, "Hey, sounds great. Let's go. Let me out of here. I want to get to the next session." I didn't. I cared about what the drums sounded like, and I had suggestions, and I found myself one of the really first calls, what's referred to as first call studio musicians. I maintained that ethic, throughout the years, of just caring what my part sounded like on the record, and also never holding back my 2 cents if I felt that I got something had to be said, which often was the case.
When you were doing these sessions, what producer impressed you the most?
One producer that impressed me the most, without a doubt, was a guy named Bob Ezrin, who I went on to work with Peter Gabriel and Alice Cooper and Kiss, a lot of people. Bob Ezrin was the ultimate record producer. He could conceive the record. He could engineer the record. I saw him jump when the engineer got sick on an Alice Cooper session. I saw him engineer, set the recorder, come into the studio, and walk around to each instrument and play each one to show the guys what he was hearing. So he got behind the drums. He said, "I'm hearing this kind of beat," and would play killer beat. Get on the bass, play a bass line. Try something like this. Guitar, everything. And then he would eventually sit at the piano and do the reference vocal and play piano on the take. I don't think any record producer before or after him could do something like that. I don't know. I maybe John Legend or maybe Babyface or one of the new cutting edge producers can. I've never experienced anybody do that, and that made an amazing impression on me.
There's so many artists that you have played music with. I mean, if you look at the different sessions that you did, James Brown, Judy Collins, Jimi Hendrix, as you mentioned, Kiss, Alice Cooper, Peter Gabriel. I mean, we could just go on and on and on. Was there one that if you had to pick one to represent what you could do, that you would basically put in your portfolio first?
Paul, you know what? Believe it or not, I mean, I did a beautiful album with Peter Gabriel, his first solo album after leaving Genesis. But and I was proud of my playing. I hated the mix that they ended up with. I don't know why it ended up that way, because it sounded great in the studio, but something happens sometimes when it gets to the street and it gets to be in record form. But I'm most proud of, believe it or not, I think I would have to say that my drum track on James Brown's Funky President, which went on to become the sampled beat on 72 hit records. To this day, when I meet a programmer, like I think you know what I mean by a programmer, a synth guy that does a lot of hip hop and R&B stuff, which many times is just programmed in synths and computers. And when I meet those guys, they know their history. And when I tell them I was the drummer on Funky President, I get a whole different treatment from them. and I look back at it, and I'm amazed at how great James Brown, how great he was. Because that track wasn't that great, but when he sang on top of it, he pulled it all. He just knitted it all together, and it became killer. And that's one of my favorite sessions. His drummers were playing some percussion. I don't know if it ended up on that particular track, but they were in a booth playing percussion, and I was playing drums. Little white Jewish guy playing drums. I was very happy to hear. The engineer told me years later, he said, "You know that James really liked your playing. In fact, he said, "Let's get that Jew boy back," because he couldn't remember my last name. A little hard to remember. And then I ran into him, and he was great. I ran into him. I told him I was the drummer, by the way. I was with Paul Schaefer at a hard rock club, and we were hanging with James. And I told him I was the drummer on Funky President, and he was beautiful. It was great, incredible force, music force.
You also played on the John Lennon and Yoko Ono album, Milk and Honey.
I have a good story about Yoko.
All right.
If you want to hear it. My friend Jimmy Malin, the percussionist, was contracting a session for Yoko. He had somehow managed never to hear Yoko sing, or whatever you call that she does. So we all gathered together at the session, waiting for Yoko to arrive. She arrives late, of course. And we're all sitting at the instruments ready to go. And she comes into the room, and she's got a piece of paper, and she says, "Okay, B flat, and now you play 8 bars, and then I come in, I sing. Okay, just B flat chord." And okay, 1 chord. We pretty much know what we're going to be doing. So we start vamping, and don't forget Jimmy Malin. Jimmy Malin, I should have said, is in the center of the studio with baffles around him, because he's the contractor, and I guess he wanted to be able to see everybody at once. And anyway, so he's in the middle playing conga drums, and so we're playing like a groove, like do chicka baka chicka do chicka baka chicka, and it's like 8 bars: 6 2 3 4 7 2 3 4 8 2. Now here she comes in. She goes, and Jimmy Malin jumps up, thinks it's feedback, throws the earphones off, and says, "What the hell is that?" And everybody's looking at him saying, "No," whispering and mouthing, "Sit down, keep playing. This is how she sings." And he had the really, really like a pitiful look on his face, and he put his phones back on and sat down at the conga and kept playing. But it was a moment. It was a great moment and a great review of her music.
With that said, was there a track from that album that you most appreciated?
Paul, I never pursued wanting to hear it. I don't know why. I just I wasn't. I don't know. I don't think I ever heard the finished mixes of any of those sessions. And I played with her a couple of times. I think she was nice. I liked her. And I bet she was a genius of sorts in art as an artist, or performance artist, or whatever that's called. But the music thing, gee whiz, come on. It's like that was crazy. I don't know if I gave you the visual descriptively enough. But if you could just picture the guy standing up and yelling, "What the hell is that?" And I imagine, I don't even remember looking at her face. I couldn't bear to look at her face because she must have seen it. But it all happened like within seconds. Anyway, that was a moment that I won't forget.
How did you transition from being a session player to being a producer yourself?
It was a natural. I had a big mouth, and I would say things. I would see things that were going down on a session that I knew weren't right. And when a session is not going well, it's somehow the drummer, because it doesn't feel right, and they don't know why it's not feeling right. Somehow the drummer gets the heat, and I would speak up, and I would just say, "Hey, could we just maybe try waiting? Let the bass come in first, and maybe after like coming in letter B, and let it breathe a little bit up front or something, I started doing it from the drums. And then I had ideas for conceptions for albums that I always wanted to do. And then I did. In fact, one of them that we had communicated about was Regis and Joy's record, which was my idea. I thought it was one of those, on paper, how could it miss? How could this miss? There's 5 million people that show up every morning to listen to that TV show, watch and listen to that TV show, that adore him and his wife. And his wife loves to sing, and nobody's asking her to sing. And so it's like everybody wins situation. It's like, not only that, we'll make good music. He loves to sing too, Regis. He adores singing. Dean Martin was his idol. I thought, wow, this on paper, this is gold. When we had the launch party for the CD, which was a spectacular thing, because Regis was the spokesperson for TD Bank at the time, and we had the flagship TD Bank on Madison and 42nd Street as the party site, and Trump was there. I introduced Donald Trump to say a few words. He's on the record at the party. I heard and saw Tony Bennett holding the album and saying, "Regis, this is gold. I'm holding gold in my hand." And so did Letterman, by the way, on the Letterman show. We did a Letterman show, and Letterman said, I'm holding gold in my hands here. Only one thing that we never took into account was that Regis's producer, I forgot his first name, John Gelman, I think is his name, did not allow Regis to plug the record because he wanted the music on the show to be contemporary, and because he wanted to draw a younger audience. He was hoping to draw a younger audience. And what I had planned was every day or once a week, for as many weeks as it took, Regis would do one song from the record with Joy and plug it. And just hold it up and say, hey, guys, don't forget about the album. That's all we needed. And he couldn't do it. He couldn't do it because it was forbidden by his producer, and he didn't want to buck heads with him. We just watched it. We watched it sink into oblivion. But there it was, on paper, one of the best ideas I ever had. And in an era of people not buying CDs because they're downloading everything, his demographic, that audience, is a CD buying audience. And all he had to do was hold it up, and it would have been a million seller. And we started a record label because we knew it couldn't miss. And so we started our own record label called Big Dot Records. It just didn't happen. It didn't work. It's like life happened,
With that said, from that album, the duets album of Regis and Joy, was there a track that you felt they did the best?
Well, there's a track that Regis sings that I thought he sounded as good as, I'm not going to say as good as any singer, but as good as any of those like singers that are acceptable, like Fred Astaire, when Fred Astaire would make his records. He had that charm and his reading of the lyric, I thought was great. It was the song called Nevertheless, I'm in Love with You. He did a great job on that. And Joy had some nice moments on the folks that live on the hill. She sang beautifully, and she's very talented musically. She was nervous as can be, but she got through it. She has a nice instrument. She has a nice voice. I think they enjoyed doing it. Regis enjoyed watching Joy have a good time. They were very enjoyable sessions, as you can imagine. Regis makes comedy out of nothing. So it doesn't matter. We put him in. It doesn't put him in anywhere. Put him in, in front of a Korean grocer or something with no sense of humor, and he'll he'll find a way to make him laugh. He's brilliant at that, as you know.
The name of your studio is Deep Diner.
Yes, Deep Diner.
Where does that
music
come from?
That's a good question. The arranger on all the projects I've done as a producer, and my best friend in the world is a guitarist named Bob Mann, who was the arranger for all the Rod Stewart, 90% of the Rod Stewart hits, the standards hit records. He does all of Steve Tyrell's arrangements, and he did Somewhere Out There. He was the arranger for Somewhere Out There. And I'm forgetting the question, Paul. Help me get
where
back
you
on
got
track.
the name Deep Diner?
The name. Oh yeah. Okay. So Bob and I grew up together, and as young thinkers, we used to go and talk about Camus and existentialism at this diner. Anytime we had a problem or something, Bob, meet me at the Deep Diner, where we would go. We would go and eat French fries and talk deep. So we called it the Deep Diner. Then we named the studio Deep Diner. That's where it comes from. Other people have put other images to it. Dining deeply. You could use your own imagination. But it came from that. It came from us going to the diner as 17-year-olds and talking about Hermann Hesse and what's going on here on planet Earth.
We're talking with musician, record producer, and drummer Allan Schwartzberg. You just mentioned the guitarist Bob Mann. That makes me wonder, what session players do you most want to get in your studio when you're making an album?
Well, what you want to do is cast. It's like a casting thing, very much like a movie casting thing. There are some great players that do certain things great, and other things you would think they would, but they don't. So what you do, it's a really good question. I pride myself in being like kind of a Robert Duvall character actor on drums, in that I could speak the genre on the drums authentically and sound like a country player, sound like a real rock player, because I played with Alice Cooper and Kiss and stuff like that, and jazz, and I played with jazzers. You would cast somebody for a session. If it's if it's jazzy rock and roll, there's a guy named John Colbert who I had on the Regis record, who is wonderful at rock and roll and can play some jazz, and then there's a piano player named Mike Renzi, who's been Tony Bennett's conductor and working with Lady Gaga and Tony, who is a stone cold jazzer and plays great, just a great accompanist. And then there are horn players. If you need a solo, there are horn players that specialize in playing like trumpet solos and sax solos that maybe are not the best music readers and section players. So you would cast them, if whatever you need. I need a saxophone player that could solo and play great in a section. And then we would call those people. And you get to know them from experience, from word of mouth. And that's kind of how this, reputation, and that's how the studio scene stayed alive. It was basically everybody's collective opinion about who did what well.
Can you tell the listeners out there about anything coming up in the future with Allan Schwartzberg?
Well, I did a record. I did an album that I love, that only Brazilians have heard, because it was only released in Brazil, with the singer B.J. Thomas. He did I just pictured B.J.'s voice, which is beautiful, and his own, just like Johnny Mathis has his own voice, B.J. Thomas has his own voice, and Sinatra. And we did a Brazilian album with B.J. that was just beautiful. And I think we may have another one of those things coming up where he will possibly join forces with one of the big Brazilian stars. That would be great fun. Maybe do half of it in Brazil and do half of it in New York, and have it be a kind of a hybrid album. There's also a project that's on the back burner that I always wanted to get to, and that is a duet with Dr. John. There's a song that I've been saving that I love, that I have to get to one of these days with Dr. John. I've spoken to him about it. He actually likes it. He doesn't like many songs that come from the outside. So we're making it up as we go along at this point. I think there's an arranger named Charlie Colello. Do you know that name?
I don't know that one.
Okay, you should Google him. He's an arranger. He's arranged so many hit records, and he's absolutely brilliant. And we recently did a live show. It's like Charlie Colello, the hit maker. I mean, he's arranged all the Frankie Valli stuff, Neil Diamond, the Savannah Band, so many records, so many Sinatra records. Anyway, he's got a live show that he wants to do that we've been talking about, and it might be a PBS special. We're angling for that, and maybe touring the symphony orchestras with the Charlie Colello show. But just Google him, Paul, and you'll see. He'd be a good interview too, because you'll enjoy it. He has a great memory, and he's got a lot of stories. Killer stories. Great story.
What is the best thing about being Allan Schwartzberg?
That would be Susan Schwartzberg.
Who is Susan Schwartzberg?
Girl of my dreams.
Wonderful.
44 years, going on 45 years, which is kind of a music business record. I would say, and my children, I have two beautiful daughters, I have two wonderful grandkids, and I'm still trying to be the best Allan I could be, I guess we all are. I hope that answers. Does that answer it?
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. So my last question is very open-ended. I would just ask that you address the audience. There are all kinds of people, music fans, people who are musicians. What would you say to them?
Wow. Gee whiz. I would say it depends on in how much love they have for being a musician. If you want to be a musician, is that what you want, or do you want to be very musical? It's such a crazy, rough business now to break into. Very few opportunities to learn the ropes, so to speak. It's a tough road. I would tell somebody, see if you could write songs. Because songs never go away. I mean, they've changed in style and in lyrics and music a lot. What's considered a great song the paradigm has shifted. But if you could write songs, that is a great way to be in music. But if you love it, just do it. Just practice and hope you are gifted with the magic chromosome that enables you to let the music take you places. If not, just enjoy it. Just enjoy. I think amateur means lover. So you could remain an amateur and still be valid. But as far as the music business, I cannot get into it without painting a dark picture. It's It's not a business that was what it was. It's no longer what it was, and it's a lot of work and a lot of heartbreak and disappointment. And but if you just enjoy the process, then enjoy it. Enjoy it, I guess, is enjoy what you're doing. That goes for anything. That's an open-ended answer for your open-ended question. You asked some great questions, man.
Oh, well,
Beautiful.
thank you.
Beautiful.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
And thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you for the opportunity. One more thing before we go.
Yeah.
As the man we were talking about earlier, Regis Philbin, is going to be calling in about a half hour. Do you have any advice for me?
You will. I think you'll have a great time. I think you're going to have a great time.
That's good.
He is. If you liked him, watching him on TV, that's how he is. He's just that way. I walked down the street with him many, many times. People they just are drawn to him. I hope they still are. You slip off the screen and then your popularity fades, but there are people that love him because he's lovable. He's just a lovable guy. He loves music. He might say that I drove him crazy with doing take after take, but I not compared to some of the other people that produced him. And I think and I think he agrees, we made a fantastic little keepsake for he and his wife. And should have been a smash. It's unfortunate about that. But I don't know if you should dwell on the Gelman thing. That's the truth. That is the absolute truth. But if you want to, you can go after it. But I think it might be unpleasant for him to talk about, and it also I couldn't understand it because it has Regis's name on the door. The show has his name on the door. So why can't he do whatever he wants on the show? But apparently he couldn't. And in the end, the record wasn't a hit record, and it should have been. It should have been a hit record. Not because it's got great songs that nobody's ever heard or great performances. It's because of his audience. His audience loves him, as you will when you finish talking to him. And give him a kiss from me.
All right, I'll
as they say in showbiz.
I will. I'll tell him what you said.
Yeah, tell him I said not on the lips, cheek. Definitely cheek. Thanks,
you,
Paul. And keep in touch. All the best, man.
Likewise. Don't ever hesitate to contact.
Okay.